This is Hank Hill, and he is the main character of a TV show called King of the Hill.
So are you Chinese or Japanese?
I live in California last 20 years, but first come from Laos.
So are you Chinese or Japanese?
Now, Hank is known for a lot of things like having a great time with his friends and family, and although his day job is selling propane and propane accessories, a lot of people don't know that Hank Hill used to be an incredible football player. But unfortunately in high school, Hank had broke his ankle and he was never able to play football again. And for the rest of his life, he blamed himself for not being able to live up to his true potential.
You broke your ankle. How can you possibly blame yourself for an injury like that?
So today, I am putting Hank Hill into College Football 25. Let's see what happens if his ankle injury never took away his career, as we'll follow him on his road to glory. Now, coming out of high school, Hank Hill did still snap his ankle in the state championship. But this time, he was still able to play football after, and based on how great he was in high school, he was going to have a ton of options and a lot of teams that were willing to take a risk on him. But throughout his entire life, he believed he was born and raised in Texas, and his team was none other than the Texas Longhorns. So when Hank saw that he would maybe have an opportunity to compete as a backup running back, his college decision became very easy, as Hank Hill decided to sign with Texas. Now, as soon as Hank stepped on campus, he was ready to hit the field. And when he did, the coaches had noticed that he had a lot of potential. They also noticed that he had a lot of work to do as well, though. And with the Texas backfield that was stacked his freshman season, it seems like he's going to be relegated to a number 3 role. And for the first handful of games of the year, he didn't play a single down. He sat on the bench and watched Texas go 4-0 up until a game against Mississippi State, where Hank was finally coming in for his first carry of his career, and he gets stopped in the backfield for a 1-yard loss. But luckily for Hank, they brought him back later in the game on a 3rd and 6, where they needed to convert in order to close the game out. And it was actually Hank who not only made the reception, but made his way upfield for the first touchdown of his college football career. He's showing the coaches that he has a little bit of pass-catching ability too. And with this score, Hank helps Texas win another game on their season. Now, Hank Hill did not really get much playing time throughout the rest of the year, but he did make his next appearance in a game against Vanderbilt, where on this play he leaked out to the flat and made the most of his opportunity as he scored another touchdown on the year. And considering that it was a score that was early on in the game, he felt great about contributing to a 21-10 victory over Vanderbilt. Now, by the end of his freshman season, Texas would actually make it into the college football playoffs, and with their first playoff matchup being against Georgia, they were definitely the underdogs going into the game. But at the very least, Texas was able to keep this one close all throughout. And surprisingly, they actually sent this game into overtime, where they were able to come out and win it. Texas was getting themselves to the second round of the playoffs after being a 9-3 team and barely even making it in. But unfortunately, now they're about to face off against the number 3 team in the country, the Alabama Crimson Tide. But once again, it turned out that it was not unfortunate, because Hank was able to watch on the sidelines as the Longhorns opened a whole Texas-sized can of whoop-ass on Alabama, sending them to the next round against Notre Dame, where once again they come up victorious. And somehow, as the 11th seed, Texas was able to make their way to the national championship, and Hank Hill might have a chance to win a ring with his favorite team against the Oregon Ducks. But early on, it becomes very clear that this is where the Texas Cinderella story ends, because by the time the 4th quarter rolls around, Oregon is beating Texas so bad that Hank actually gets put in the game. And the coaches decided to put him out there at wide receiver, where he made a catch and turned it upfield for a touchdown, coming up with the only points for Texas as they would go on to lose this game 7-28. And although Hank had to sit on the sidelines and watch his team lose a national championship, he knew that the following year he was finally going to have a chance to get the job done. So even though he had some offers to explore via the transfer portal in the offseason, he decided to stay at Texas because he had a chance to become the number 2 halfback when fall camp came around. And this was an opportunity that Hank had no intentions of passing up on. This is something that he had dreamed of throughout his entire life, and in a world where his little ankle injury turned out to be just a minor sprain, he would start his sophomore year as the number 2 halfback for the Texas Longhorns. And now going into the season, Hank is seriously focused on improving his skills, because it turns out that his first game of the season might actually be the toughest game of the year, as the Texas Longhorns were going on the road and facing off against the number 1 team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now in this game, Hank didn't play a lot at running back, but he did help them get down to the goal line and eventually make it 7-0. Now Hank was definitely proving that he could be a wide receiver / running back hybrid, because some of the routes that he was running were very impressive to the coaches. Now unfortunately, they didn't let him play too much throughout the game, but they did put him back in down at the goal line, where on this play, his line created a wide open lane for a touchdown, his first one of the season, and it turns out that this score would actually help Texas come away with their first W of the season. A 31-25 victory to start out the year, but now that Hank is starting to become an impact player on this team, he got some reporters asking him questions about the other sports at the school like soccer.
Soccer was invented by European ladies to keep them busy while their husbands did the cooking.
Hank would make his first appearance in his next game against San Jose State down at the goal line. And early on, he was able to get in for his second touchdown of the season, extended the Texas lead to 2 possessions. And throughout this game, when Hank got opportunities on the ground, he was actually making the most of them. He had a lot of plays where he picked up some pretty big yardage and moved the chains for his team, including this play at the top of the fourth quarter where somehow Hank was able to escape his way from everybody. He made a lot of big plays in this game, but none of them were as big as this one. And even though he would eventually be tracked down and pushed out of bounds, they put him back in later on in the fourth quarter and give him a chance to score another touchdown on the game, and not only cap off an incredible performance, but give Texas the 31-10 victory. And in a game where Hank Hill had a little over 200 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns, you better believe that he was now getting a chance to be the #1 halfback for Texas. And the coaches weren't too surprised that he came out running so well after how he ran last week. So it made sense that by the end of it, he would win the job and have a chance to become a star running back for Texas. But his journey was about to start here in his next game as the #1 team in the country, and they were about to face off against UTEP. Now, one thing out the gate that the entire crowd had noticed that people hadn't really noticed before is just how fast Hank is. He was able to split some defenders and go for a 25-plus yard gain on the first drive, setting up his team with a chance to score, which eventually they would with the pass to the end zone. Now, although Texas looked like they were about to steamroll UTEP, it didn't necessarily go like that throughout this game. But later on, they did put Hank out at receiver, and he was coming up with his own touchdown. A huge play in the corner of the end zone to extend Texas' lead to 2 possessions. But in a game where this Texas offense was relatively struggling compared to how they usually play, this game would start slipping away by the time the fourth quarter rolled around. And after this play where Hank took this handoff to the right side and swerved past the entire defense and dove into the end zone for a touchdown, that had done enough to put this game away, as Texas goes on to win this game 21-0. And Hank goes on to win another player of the game with 100 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. He also added over 70 yards through the air, so he was feeling pretty good about how he played. But as far as the season stats, he knew that he had some work to do if he wanted to catch up to the nation's top leading rushers. So he knew that he was going to have to come out at home and have another great game in his next one against Akron. Now, to start this game, Texas actually wanted to pass a lot, and Manning was out there throwing a pick. Maybe the ball had slipped out of his hand because of the rain, but either way, Akron was up 7. Fortunately, though, the rain might have been helping Hank evade some of these tacklers, and he was helping his team pick up some first downs, whether it be on the ground or on a play like this screen pass where he brought his team inside the goal-to-goal territory. And a couple plays later, he was easily able to get across for a touchdown to tie this game up. Now, still in the second quarter, and actually only a couple offensive plays later, Hank was taking a carry out to the left side, where this time he was breaking loose. He was just barely able to outrun multiple defenders on the sideline, and he thought that he might get caught, so he dove into the end zone for a touchdown, getting in for a score that would give Texas the 7-point lead, and it turns out that this would actually open the floodgates. Because by the end of this game, Texas was up multiple scores, and they were letting Hank get in for another one to make it a 3-possession lead and officially put this game away. Texas goes on to win this one 31-14, and Hank had the best game of his season so far. Another game over 200 yards rushing, but 4 touchdowns this time to go with it. And rightfully so, he would not only win his first SEC, but National Offensive Player of the Week. The thing with Hank though, man, he was not satisfied with just being good for a couple weeks. He knew that one day he would grow up and want to be a Texas football legend, but he knows the only way to do that is by being great all throughout the year, and helping Texas take down squads like the number 3 ranked team in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, this was a game that initially was not going very well for Hank. He realized that there were actually a couple players on Georgia that played against him in the high school state championship game. And even though that was getting to his head a little bit, he would eventually turn it on as he took this handoff to the left side and then cut it upfield for a touchdown, making the play before half that gives Texas a 7-point lead. But in the third quarter, those same guys from Hank's high school championship game were talking crazy. But it was all good because Hank was about to take care of that.
Careful eating, Hank! You might choke!
This is the sound of your ankle snapping.
I'm gonna kick your ass.
Because as soon as his ball was snapped, Hank took it to the right side and started zooming upfield. Soon there wasn't anybody within 5 yards of him as he crossed over the goal line for a score, giving Texas their lead back after Georgia tied it up. And this time it looked like Georgia was not going to tie it up, because even though Texas throughout the rest of this game was struggling pretty greatly, apparently that Georgia Bulldog offense was never able to get it done, and Texas would go on to win this game 20-17. Hank would go on to rush for 96 yards in this game, and that was pretty good considering he was playing against Georgia. But he knows that he might have to be better in games against teams like that later on. So he's working hard to make improvements throughout the rest of the season because he's about to go into another game on the road, as Texas is getting ready to face off against Mississippi State. Now, this Texas offense started out slow in this game, but they would get a little bit more energized after Hank jumps over a guy on this play. In one play, he moves his team right towards midfield, and on the very next play, he's moving his team way past it, taking this handoff and moving his way all the way towards the red zone, setting his team up with a chance to score, which eventually they would with the pass to the end zone. Now, this game would remain stalemated at 7-6 throughout the majority of the second half, up until this play where Hank was able to take the stretch to the outside, and he was clearing past the entire defense. He wasn't the fastest player in the world, but nobody was going to catch him on this one. Now, later on in this game, after getting down to the goal line and taking another stretch to the right side, Hank was celebrating his way towards the end zone for another score that would ultimately do enough to put this game away, as Texas goes on to win this game 21-6, and Hank rushes for over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. And with the schedule that looks like Texas might be able to steamroll throughout the rest of the year, there's no telling what kind of numbers Hank Hill could be putting up. But more importantly, he's just focused on coming away with the win in the Red River rivalry against Oklahoma. Now, this game did not get started off well, as the Texas offense was actually giving up a touchdown on their opening drive, a score that set Oklahoma up with the chance to take control of this game, but clearly Texas did not have any plans to allow that to happen. The quarterback got the ball out to a receiver over the top to tie the game up. Now, out the backfield, Hank was also becoming a dangerous receiving threat too, because he was out there saying, hey, picking up first downs for his team. Now, in a game where this Texas offense was playing extremely well, it turns out that the person who was motivating everybody was Archie Manning.
Yeah, man, talking about that dang old cuts and collars, man, like when they come over to clean that pool, man, start going.
And nah, see, that's exactly what Hank wants to hear right now. So when he took this handoff, he just bounced off of everybody and zoomed upfield. And out of nowhere, it looked like he was taking this carry 95 yards all the way to the crib for a touchdown. A score that extends Texas' lead to 2 possessions with 0 seconds left in the half. And even though Oklahoma's defense would start strapping up throughout the rest of the game, it was too little too late, as Texas was able to come away with the win in the Red River rivalry 24-14. Led by Hank Hill, who had 145 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Now, at this point, everything is going well for Hank. Texas is undefeated, he's one of the leading rushers in the country, and his team is ranked number 1 in the country. So now they just got to go on the road and do their best to take down the Florida Gators. Now, although Texas started off down 7-0, Hank Hill was working to change that, helping his team move upfield where eventually they would make their way towards the end zone for a touchdown, tying this game up at 7-0, where in the second quarter they had a chance to take the lead. Unfortunately, though, Arch Manning would throw a pick, and with Hank Hill going on to miss the tackle, that would set Florida up with a great opportunity to score a touchdown, which they do. Luckily, though, for Texas, they found a gem in the 6'2 receiving back Hank Hill, because as a sophomore, he was out there consistently able to make plays for the team, getting them in position to score another touchdown before the half, which Hank Hill would do the honors of. He would make this a 14-14 ball game, but after halftime, things would begin to change, and I wish I could say that it was for the better, because Archie Manning was throwing a pick that allowed Florida to extend their lead to 2 possessions. Now, Texas would begin to bounce back with Hank Hill at wide receiver of all things, as he caught this pass upfield and was able to bring it all the way to the end zone for a touchdown. A play that now made this a 1-possession game, and Texas would actually get the ball back with a chance to win. Unfortunately, though, it just did not seem like it was their day, as another turnover this late meant that Texas was about to take their first loss of this season. 31-22 on the road, and it was actually a game where maybe Texas did not run it enough, because Hank was averaging a little over 8 yards a carry, and he only had 6 of them. And because of this, Hank was definitely not in a good mood, and he didn't want to deal with these dumbass reporters asking him a question about the weather or whatever.
We live in Texas. It's already 110 in the summer, and if it gets 1 degree hotter, I'm gonna kick your ass.
At this point, man, Hank knew that he just had to move on with the rest of his season and try his best to bounce back with the following game on the road, as Texas was about to face off against Kentucky. Now, early on in this game, there were some guys making plays all over the field. They had the backup running back getting in for a touchdown, and then on the following drive, they had one of the Kentucky defenders coming up with a pick, and eventually they would go on to score a touchdown, but it was all good though, because before the end of the half, Hank Hill was able to power his way into the end zone for a score, pushing the Texas lead back to 2 possessions, but with a whole half left, there was still a lot more plays to be made, and Hank was out there making them. He was coming up with the catch on 3rd and 9 that brought his team to the end zone for a touchdown. He added a little cushion to this Texas lead and then danced on him while he was at it. Now, at this point, this game was already over, but it would be made official after Hank gets in for another score that would officially put this game away. as Texas goes on to win this game 34-14, and Hank Hill only runs for 75 yards, but he gets in for 3 touchdowns. Now at this point at 8-1 in the SEC, there was some good news and some bad news. The bad news being that Texas might not play in the conference championship, but the good news is that Hank Hill was somehow the leading candidate for the Heisman Trophy. He was one of the leading rushers in the country, but he knew that coming off a couple lackluster games, he was bound to drop in the rankings if he didn't step it up soon. So what better time to do so than against the top 25 ranked team in the country, the Arkansas Razorbacks. And Hank had definitely stepped it up alright. In this game, he actually had multiple plays that were identical down at the goal line. 2 touchdowns that were damn near exactly the same, and that would help Texas come away with a 28-14 victory. He only had 79 yards, but he did have another touchdown down at the goal line, and he actually won SEC Offensive Player of the Week for the performance. Now Hank knew the important thing for Texas to do was to keep winning, and they were definitely doing that. Once again down at the goal line, Hank Hill is finessing his way in the end zone for a score, but in a game that was actually the lowest scoring game for Texas all season, Hank Hill continued to be the guy all throughout the game to get them out of tough situations, and it's probably why they went on to squeak this game out 10-7 at home. Another game where Hank didn't put on his best rushing performance, but he was bound to turn it around. And he planned on doing so in the last game of the regular season against the #1 team in the country. And early on, he definitely did, because he took this carry and said "Shablaka" before falling forward across the goal line for a touchdown, getting in for a score that would set the tone for the rest of his squad, and his teammates would follow suit, because Arch Manning was out there delivering a dime down the middle of the field that would go in for a touchdown, getting in for a score that would take the lead for Texas. And even though Texas A&M would go on to tie the game up, this Texas team was just running well in all phases, and they would just barely be able to win this game 17-14. And finally, Hank was able to bounce back with a 172-yard game off of 30 carries. But he also had over 70 receiving yards, as in a year where Hank Hill had done a lot of growth and development, he had led his team to an SEC championship, and he knows that with one more victory, he can help Texas stamp their way back to the college football playoffs. Now Hank had started this game off absolutely locked in, but it wasn't just him, because Arch Manning was out there making an incredible throw off his back foot, getting the ball out to Hank where he just outruns the entire defense. This man was racing his way up the sideline for a touchdown to start this game off, but the entire crowd felt like there was about to be more to come. And there definitely was, but not necessarily from Hank quite yet, as another receiver goes over the top for a touchdown, getting in for a score that was already starting to make things look bad for Texas A&M. But it would get a little worse before half, as Hank was lined up at wide receiver and then broke off inside for the catch and score, making this a now 3-possession lead. And by the time the fourth quarter rolled around, this game was getting out of hand, and Hank was out there shedding off tackles on his way towards the end zone for another score, officially putting this game away and sending Texas to the college football playoffs, as they go on to win this one 31-17 in a game where Hank went for over 150 yards receiving. But now that they have won the SEC championship, the regular season is over and there are some awards to be given out. And it turns out that after a few lackluster games down the stretch, Hank Hill did not miss out on winning Player of the Year, as he had over 1,400 yards on the season and 23 touchdowns. And it turns out that was actually good enough to make him the first Heisman-winning trophy winner for Texas since 1998 when Ricky Williams won it. Hank Hill has established himself amongst the legends of Texas running backs like Ricky and Earl Campbell. An astounding year for the sophomore running back, who went on to win a bunch of other awards. But the important thing now was that Hank was about to play in the college football playoffs. And with the type of year that he's had so far, he doesn't want to let it go to waste by losing in the first round. So he's going to do his best to help Texas take care of business in their first matchup against Texas Tech. Now Hank was actually getting this game started the exact way that he was hoping he would, breaking off multiple tackles and helping his team get across midfield on the opening drive. Where on this 3rd and goal at wide receiver, Hank continued to show that he was a threat, coming up with a score that would actually take the lead for Texas and give them a little bit of momentum going forward. Because later on in the second quarter, Arch Manning would find a guy open on the right side of the end zone and score a touchdown that was taking back the lead for Texas before half. But this was actually a game that would remain close all throughout up until the fourth quarter, where on this drive, Texas knew that their best option was to hand the ball off to Hank and allow him to continue to power his way through. Hank had become the workhorse back, and he continued to move the chains for his team up until they got into field goal range and he got stopped on 3rd down. But apparently that was all Texas needed, because they go on to win this game 20-7, kicking a last-second field goal to send them to the second round, and they can be thankful that Hank was able to put up 160 yards on the ground. Now at this point, Hank knew that Texas was very close to achieving the season that they were capable of having. They could get themselves right back to the national championship, but first they were going to have to take care of business against Boise State. Now unfortunately, Texas was starting out this game very slow, not just coming out here getting stopped on third down, but Hank Hill was actually catching this pass and fumbling for the first time on the season. A play that leads to Boise State taking a 10-0 lead, but Hank knows that he's just going to have to make up for it. So on this play, he takes his handoff and bursts up the middle, and just like that, he was running free. There was nobody who was going to catch him on his way towards the end zone for another touchdown on the season, and the first one in the game for Texas to make it a one-possession deficit. Now, Hank continued to make plays throughout this game, even though Boise State was keeping it at a 2-possession deficit, as Hank jumped over a player for a first down at some point. And it was on the same drive that he would get across the goal line for a score, bringing it back to a one-possession game and giving Texas the chance to potentially take the lead in the second half. Unfortunately, though, it didn't look like that was about to happen after down by 6. Arch Manning throws an interception with 1 minute left in this game. And all of a sudden, Texas was relying on their defense, but they gave him a chance to make a play. And on this second down and 10 with less than 10 seconds left, there was a receiver getting wide open over the top. And he was bringing this one towards the end zone for a touchdown with 6 seconds left to go. It was an absolute miracle, and the Texas Longhorns were able to complete the comeback, winning this one 24-23 in a game that was led by Hank Hill's 150-plus yard performance and 2 touchdowns. And in back-to-back seasons, Hank Hill was going back to the national championship. And unlike his time back in high school, he's going to try his best not to get injured and leave his team out to dry, because Hank feels like it's about time that he brings Texas football back to glory. But in order to do that, he knows that he's going to have to play his best, because Texas is ending their season how they started it, by facing off against one of the best teams in the entire nation, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, this game was definitely not going too well for Hank and his Texas offense, as they were not able to get any points out throughout the first quarter, and was actually only able to muster up 3 by the time the 2-minute warning came around. But on this third down and 17, Hank got the backfield and would begin to turn things around for his team, because he had helped the Longhorns get down to the goal line, and with less than 15 seconds left, he was out there making a catch right up the middle for a touchdown that was now taking the lead over Ohio State right before half. And after half, even with Ohio State taking the lead right back, Hank Hill was putting on the moves to start moving his team into scoring position. And they would head into the fourth quarter with the rest of the team feeling extra motivated and coming up with some big plays themselves. But this was a game where the coaches were moving Hank Hill all over the place, because they knew that he was the one guy who could continue to make plays consistently, as he was coming up with a catch on the sideline and diving into the end zone for a score, helping to take the lead back in this game against Ohio State. And apparently he wasn't done yet, because he had some words for their defense on the next drive.
I'm gonna kick your ass. Then I'm gonna reenact kicking your ass.
Yeah, and that definitely looked like that was exactly what Hank was doing on this play. He had burst his way up the middle, and out of nowhere, he was gone. There was nobody that was going to catch Hank on his way towards the end zone to extend the Texas lead to 2 possessions. Hank Hill had just made probably the biggest play of his life, and it might have just won him a national championship, because the defense is coming up with a stop. So now all Texas has to do is just put this game away. So Hank takes his hand off, but he fumbles the ball, giving the ball away to Ohio State. And now he just has to hope that they don't go down the field and score a touchdown. And they don't. And Hank Hill leads Texas to a national championship victory. Hank had just accomplished one of his biggest childhood dreams. This is something that he's always wanted to do since he was a kid. And now he is finally able to live in this moment as a national champion, as a member of his favorite football team. But now that Texas has finally won the national championship, we can take a look at Hank Hill's stats, where he ended up leading the country with a little under 2,000 yards and 26 touchdowns. But we cannot forget the extra 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns as a receiver as well, putting him over 3,000 yards on the season and over 30 touchdowns. Now, he did not go on to break any single game or single season records, but the important thing is that he did win a national championship, and he did also win a Heisman Trophy. So at this point, Hank is either thinking about running it back with Texas for another championship, or potentially transfer to another school before he enters the NFL draft. But I'll leave that decision up to you guys. If you guys want to see part 2 of this video, be sure to get this one to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also, be sure to check out some of these other stories until the next one comes out, and comment down below what else you guys want to see next. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and other than that, I will catch you guys next time.